Autoimmune diseases result when the immune system loses its ability to distinguish self from non-self. So non-self would be foreign. And hopefully the original lymphocyte doesn't get to this point. That's why immunocompetence is required, kind of a testing that occurs in the bone marrow or the thymus originally so that it can differentiate the self-immune system from the foreign immune system. But when this does happen, unfortunately, there are production of autoantibodies and sensitized cytotoxic T cells that are going to destroy the body's tissue. So these are a few examples of autoimmune diseases: rheumatoid arthritis, myasthenia gravis, multiple sclerosis, Graves' disease, which is a type of hyperthyroidism, type 1 diabetes mellitus, systemic lupus erythematosus, just commonly referred to as lupus. And there's another one called glomerulonephritis. And glomerulonephritis is an example where the antibodies are attacking the glomerulus, basically the part of the kidney that filters the blood. So the way this is treated is to suppress the immune system. So anti-inflammatory drugs help. Also corticosteroids that would also affect or suppress the immune system. So the research that's currently being done is showing that activating regulatory T cells could help prevent or retard the progress of these autoimmune diseases. So another example of a problem with the immune system is what's called a hypersensitivity. And in the hypersensitivity, it's just what it sounds like. The immune system is more sensitive, much more than it should be, to antigens. So the immune responses are perceived harmless to most people, but they can cause tissue damage. So the different types are the course, the time course that it's been, whether the antibodies or the T cells are involved. So the antibodies could cause immediate or subacute hypersensitivities. Or in the case of T cells, they cause delayed hypersensitivity. But in all cases, it's fairly significant. So the examples of those hypersensitivities now are, the first one is the immune hypersensitivity, and that's basically allergies. So meaning that the allergen is going to cause an immediate effect. So it's going to stimulate the immune system to have a reaction, produce a reaction. And when we think of allergies, it refers specifically to immunoglobulin E. Remember, there's 5 immunoglobulins, MADGE. And in the case of immunoglobulin E, it's activated against the antigen, so it binds to mast cells and basophils, which releases histamine. So that histamine is released, causes many of the allergic symptoms that we're used to, that we've heard about, that you see all the time on commercials. So the histamine causes vasodilation and leakiness of the vessels, leading to runny nose, itchy hives, watery eyes, and so on. If it's really bad, if the allergen is inhaled, it can cause asthma. And so the first line of treatment for this is antihistamines, things like Zyrtec or Claritin or Allegra. So hopefully it's going to be localized, but if it does spread system-wide, it can be very severe, and in that case, it's referred to as anaphylactic shock. So in this case, anaphylactic shock causes the bronchioles to constrict, making it difficult to breathe. There's vasodilation, and the treatment for this would be epinephrine, so an EpiPen. You've all heard of an EpiPen. People with this situation sometimes have to carry an EpiPen around with them all the time. So the mechanism of acute allergic reaction, the immediate response here, is what we see. I'll zoom in to show it a little better. So the first example is sensitization. The allergen invades the body, and that antigen is what is going to prime the immune system. In this case, it causes the plasma cells to produce large amounts of IgE. So the B lymphocytes make the plasma cells, and those produce the antibodies. So we can see all of these antibodies that are over here that are now being produced, small Y-shaped proteins. And the IgE antibodies are going to attach to mast cells and basophils. And when they do so, that causes histamine to be released. So the way that allergy shots work are, the goal is to try to make the person used to that allergen so that they don't have this allergic response. Their body is kind of used to that allergen. So now for a subsequent or secondary reaction response, there's more of the same. The antigens invade the body. Antigen combines with the IgE attached to the mast cells. And those mast cells have these granules of histamine. So that histamine is going to be released and is going to produce all of the allergic symptoms that were described above. So the vasodilation, there's going to be leakiness now of the capillaries. Fluid is going to flow from the capillaries into the tissue. Mucus is going to be released. We get a runny nose, possibly. And then there's constriction of the small respiratory passages, referred to as the bronchioles. So that's allergies, the immediate hypersensitivity response. So other hypersensitivities include a subacute hypersensitivity, and in this case, it's caused by IgM and IgG transferred via the blood plasma or the serum. And this causes a cytotoxic reaction. So antibodies bind to the antigen, stimulate phagocytosis, and a good example of this would be mismatched blood transfusion reaction that could lead to this. Other examples of subacute hypersensitivities, there could be another one called type 3, and in this case, there is complexes that cannot be removed from the body. So antigen-antibody complexes that are insoluble, and lupus is the best example of this. A delayed hypersensitivity is a much slower response, and the mechanism in this case depends on helper T cells. So an example of this would be contact dermatitis, also referred to as poison ivy. You don't usually see it right away, but later on you discover it. So the development of the immune system, it develops from stem cells that develop in the liver and the spleen during the first 9 weeks of development. The bone marrow, as you know, is the primary source of these stem cells, just like there are red blood cells that come from that area, white blood cells, and so on. And there are the influences on the immune system could be things like the nervous system, so depression, stress, all of that can lower your immune response. And your diet is very important. So vitamin D is required, for example, for activation of the CD8 cells. And the CD8 cells, remember, once they're activated, they become cytotoxic T cells. So this is actually supposed to be a little c, but it means cytotoxic cells.